Everyone, I'd like to call this meeting to order of the City of Albany Transportation Commission for Thursday, October 26th. Can we have a roll call?
Commissioner Barnes.
Here.
Commissioner Javindel.
Present.
Commissioner McCroskey.
Present.
Commissioner Peng will be arriving late. Commissioner Vigil McClanahan.
Present.
Commissioner Von Neidingen.
Present.
Chair Chomsky.
Present. I will read the land acknowledgement. The City of Albany recognizes that we occupy the land originally protected by the Confederated Villages of Lishan. We acknowledge the genocide that took place on these lands and must make strides to repay the moral debt that is owed to this indigenous people, specifically the Ohlone tribe. We thank them for their contributions, which have transformed our community and will continue to bring forth growth and unity. The City of Albany commits to sustaining ongoing relationships with the tribe and together build a better future for all that now make this their home. Before we get started tonight, I wanted to remind everybody on the commission that this is a public meeting and the conversation that we have is not a conversation among ourselves, but is a conversation among ourselves and the people in the room and the people online and even the people who are watching this meeting on video afterwards. So everything that we say needs to be said into the microphones. Make sure that the light on your microphone is turned on. And if you need to speak to another commissioner, that has to be done as part of the public process through speaking publicly into the microphone so everyone can hear. We now move on to public comment, which is an opportunity for people to speak about items that are not on tonight's agenda. Do we have, we have someone in the room who would like to make a public comment? We have 3 minutes.
So, hello, commissioners and city staff. My name is Estrella Sainberg, and I'm the most recently appointed commissioner to the Parks, Recreation, Open Space Commission. So I'm really excited to be serving. I really hope to bring an equity lens to the actions and projects and conversations that we have here in Albany. And I think that there's a lot of connections that we can foster between our commissions. So just consider me a resource, and maybe there's a more tangible collaboration down the line. So nice to meet you all. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the room who would like to make a comment about something that's not on tonight's agenda? It looked like we had somebody online.
Yeah, we do have one person on the line. Carrie Schulman, please go ahead. Sorry. The hand just went down, so not sure.
Oh, wait. Yes.
Okay.
Hello.
Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So my kids attend Ocean View Elementary School, and I'm calling in about the stretch of sidewalk on Jackson, just south of Buchanan, on the school side of the street. So the sidewalk there is, a traditional neighborhood sidewalk width. So very small for the high amount of traffic that Ocean View has before and after school. And directly next to that sidewalk, there's a dirt patch that's about double the width of the sidewalk. So that serves as space for people to walk on before and after school. But unfortunately, when it starts raining, that big dirt patch just turns into a giant mud pile. And so everyone's forced to squeeze onto the narrow strip of sidewalk. I spoke with Anna Delgado, the Ocean View principal, and she said that she would support paving over the dirt there. There's no plants or trees or anything, so it should be pretty manageable to pave that over. And she said she supports it, but that land is owned by the city, and so that would be something for the city to do, not the school district. So I wanted to bring that to your attention, and hopefully at some point that area can be paved over so that there's room for kids to easily walk to and from school. Thank you very much.
Do you have any thoughts about whether that's something that we would need to agendize or if it's something that Public Works could just do?
I can follow up with the commenter on ownership specifics around there, but I don't think we should make it a discussion here.
Well, I'm sorry, what was that last bit?
I can follow up with the commenter to try to answer the question about ownership of that area that she's describing.
Okay.
We have no other hands raised online.
Is there anyone else in the room who has a new comment to add? Okay. Let's move on to 3-1, monthly police data.
Thank you, Chair Chomsky. Reporting tonight on the data from the month of September. There was 1 pedestrian-involved collision reported. 0 bike-involved collisions reported this month. There were 7 injury collision reports, one of which was a report of, 7 collision reports, one of which was a reported injury collision. 14 moving citations were issued, and 2 DUI arrests remain. That concludes the monthly presentation.
Any questions from commission members? Do we have any public comment about this item? You have 3 minutes.
Good evening, I'm Peter Campbell, and I must admit I've never looked at one of these reports before, but I did check it today, and I was kind of intrigued by the trend lines that have occurred, not in the amount of pedestrian collisions each month and the bicycle collisions per month. They seem to be fairly steady, although there seems to be an uptick in the darker months for both of those items. But and it looks like the vehicle collisions per month kind of follows a level trend line over the months, as you could have seen from that chart. But I was really concerned about the chart that showed the amount of moving citations from 2016 through the present. And in 2016, 2017, 18, 19, and 20, there was a dramatic decline over that time period in the amount of moving citations. And it's been fairly steady at a very low rate from about mid-2020 until the present. And I just can't understand why that should be the case, because I see people speeding every day. I see people running down the middle lane on Marin all the time. I see people making illegal U-turns in the commercial district of Solano. And I'm just concerned that enforcement is not being carried out to look for those violations and make sure that we have some kind of a police presence, maybe a more common police presence than we currently have looking out for traffic violations. If you have fewer traffic violations, I think you'll have fewer incidences of pedestrian and bicycle collisions. So I just urge you to somehow deal with that so that we can get better enforcement of the existing traffic laws. If you don't enforce them, there's no point having them. So thank you very much.
Thank you for your comment. Any other public comment from people in the room? Anybody online? Back to the commission for discussion.
I'd like to respond to the commenter. Sir, we don't actually have any control as a commission or recommendation control over the police department. I would suggest you take your comments to the police commission.
I can just note that the police department's response to this question in the past has, towards definitely the earlier time frame in the presentation, had additional funding specific for enforcement that came from the state and from outside sources. That went away. So that's one reason that's been given for the trend. And more recently, changes in citation practice, that not necessarily less enforcement, but less citations issued can be partly reflected in the numbers as well.
I mean, one aspect of it that is within our remit is additional traffic calming measures to slow traffic and hopefully reduce, like adopting, street dressings to allow people to cross the streets more safely and slow cars down around corners and that sort of thing. There may be ways that we can address it without, increased police presence and citations.
Any other thoughts on that subject? Okay. There was one other thing I wanted to bring up, which is I really appreciate having these historical bar charts that keep growing horizontally as time passes, or I guess they keep shrinking to fit more bars. I know we asked for that a long time ago, and it's been great to see it accumulate now, but it's gotten a little hard for me to see the numeric data at the right edge of the chart, especially when the numbers are zero. So could you bring up page 2, for example? So I can see in 2023 there were just a couple of collisions. I'm guessing they were probably in March and April, but it's a little. I guess it just takes some extra effort to look and see, like how many empty bars are there at the right edge of that chart. Is there a way to just change the coloration or the formatting somehow so that a zero data point shows up more visibly? Not just an absence of a bar, but as a presence of something. I don't know enough about charting techniques as an idea.
I have a suggestion as somebody who was a presentation professional. You could take the last 2 years and separate them out as a wider section. So essentially come up with 2 graphs. So that one graph is historical and has a very squished timeline on the bottom axis, and the last 2 years take up more space and have a more broad axis.
Maybe the one that goes back in time could be done as a line instead of a bar chart, more like what the automobile line charts look like. And use the bars in cases where there are fewer data points to show.
Or the data could be shown for larger timescales in larger chunks of time in the aggregate.
I guess that seems like more of an upgrade. I was asking for just something that could be done with a simple setting in the charts that we already have that would somehow bring the 0 points out visibly, but I don't know if anybody has a suggestion for that. So. Okay. Any other comment about the police data? All right, let's move on to the consent calendar. I would actually like to pull the minutes and mention a couple of things about them. In item 5-1, we had a lot of discussion back and forth about what we called the slip lane, the curb cut that would allow northbound bicycles to enter the bike path going north on Jackson Street after the intersection. I thought it would be helpful if the minutes acknowledged that we discussed that and did not come to a conclusion or that we had mixed feelings. Ken, I think you had some wording that you suggested. What we didn't
I've
do.
lost that exact inspiration. We did not come to a consensus on that issue,
Did
but
not
we
come
had
to a
opinions.
consensus, yeah. And the other detail on the minutes is items 5-2 and 5-4, we continued to today's, or to later meetings, and I think that wasn't clear in the way the minutes were written. Does anybody else on the commission or in the public or online have any comments about the minutes? I would move to approve the minutes with those adjustments. Do we have a second?
Second.
Roll call.
Commissioner Barnes.
Aye.
Commissioner Javindel.
Aye.
Commissioner McCroskey.
Aye.
Commissioner Peng.
Yes.
Commissioner Vigil McClanahan.
Aye.
Commissioner Von Nidigan.
Aye.
Chair Tomsky. Motion carries.
That's it for the consent calendar. So now we move on to item 5-1, Kains and Adams Bikeway Pilot Project Evaluation.
Thank you, Chair. Tonight I will be presenting an evaluation on the Kains and Adams Bikeway pilot. For background, the active transportation plan was adopted in 2012, identified two-way bikeways along Kains and Adams for further study. A bikeway study was conducted, and in 2017, the recommendation to proceed with the two-way bikeway with an internal two-way traffic with entrance to each block prohibited to vehicles in the counter to the prior one-way direction. That project was developed further as a pilot as directed by City Council, and the pilot project was approved in 2019. The installation occurred early this year, primarily in January and February, with some additional touch-up work done in the subsequent few months, and we're now in October, approximately 8 months into the pilot. The objective of the Kains and Adams Bikeway has been to provide a north-south route through Albany on or near San Pablo Avenue, which is safer and less stressful than bicycling on San Pablo Avenue. This segment also is a link in a regional bicycle network that includes implementation by neighboring cities. So as I was briefly discussing with a visual, hopefully can be a little more clear here, the pilot project permits two-way vehicular traffic internal to each block, with barriers restricting entrance to the block for motor vehicles. This maintains the prior existing one-way through traffic, but permits a local resident to exit the block in either direction. Bicyclists are allowed to pass through the barriers and ride in the travel lane, as is customary on other city streets with similar widths and volume motor vehicles. By keeping the access to the block restricted to the one-way direction, access to the contraflow parking lane can only be gained by turning around within the block or by parking with the left wheels to the curb, as is allowed on a one-way street. However, parking with the left wheels to the curb on a two-way street is prohibited by state law. The safety concern with parking in this way on a two-way street is that a driver does not have a clear view of the roadway in the oncoming direction as they pull out. While parking with the left wheels to the curb is now prohibited on these blocks, as they are two-way streets with entry restrictions, this continues to be the predominant parking behavior. This continues to be of concern to the Albany Police Department, as the pilot has generated a behavior of non-compliance with the parking regulations. And the options presented are intended to address this issue. "24-hour bicycle counts before and after the installation show some mixed data and reflect both potential changes before and after, as well as variation in the small data samples. The number of cyclists counted at San Pablo and Solano increased from 78 to 100, while cyclist counts collected at 665 San Pablo decreased from 81 to 62. Kains cyclist numbers showed increases, particularly at the northern count location, while Adams numbers decreased at the northern location. Also received feedback from cyclists that's been mixed. Most of the feedback has been supportive of the two-way facility, with some commenters providing suggestions for additional improvement. Some of the comments we've received in the last few days reflect a feeling of greater comfort and an observation of greater use of the facilities. Staff has also received some feedback that the use of the street as one way by vehicles continues to make it feel unsafe to a cyclist in the contraflow direction, with the vehicles tending to drive in the middle of the street. Additional feedback has been received on the need to clarify permitted cyclist movements from Marin to Kains to increase daylighting at intersection approaches beyond the current red zones. It's also been noted that the pilot facility has not been incorporated into route mapping software to direct cyclists to utilize the two-way facility. There's also been suggestions to look at all-way stop controls at intersections to improve the utility of Kains and Adams for bicyclists through movements. Staff received requests to show the bicycle counts by direction, so I'm providing that here. The green highlights are the new direction. So the Adams Street counts shows the number dropping in the southbound direction after at 708 Adams, but increasing at Adams and Solano. The Kains and Solano numbers relatively flat, while the 635 Kains count increased. Also did intersection 24-hour video counts, which show that there hasn't been a significant observed change in the motor vehicle circulation since the pilot was installed. Vehicles exiting in the now permitted contraflow direction increased from 8 to 15 on Adams at Solano and from 11 to 37 on Kains at Solano, showing some utilization of the option to exit the block in the new direction. Vehicle volumes reflected some of the bicycle volume data. So Adams northbound showed a decrease at the Solano counts before and after, while Kains vehicles in the southbound direction showed an increase. Feedback staff received on the motor vehicle circulation, comments questioning the new traffic circulation pattern, heard from residents who have been challenged by others when utilizing the now permitted option to exit the block in the new direction. Some residents have commented expressing a desire to return to the one-way street configuration and concern with two-way vehicle traffic, particularly concerns about cut-through traffic. Other residents commenting both as cyclists and motor vehicle users have commented that there has been a calming effect in what they've perceived on their block. Staff has not identified any vehicle collisions related to the pilot design since the installation. So options presented in the staff memo there were three. The first one was to continue the current traffic circulation and pursue legislation to allow left wheel to curb parking. The second was to make Kains and Adams fully two-way, removing restrictions on entering the block. And the third was to return to one-way on Adams Street south of Washington and on Kains Street south of Garfield, converting to fully two-way north of those locations between Clay and Washington on Adams and between Brighton and Garfield on Kains. And I'll discuss those in a little more detail here. So the first option continues the current installation, pursuing state legislation to legalize the parking left wheels to curb. A project to continue the current traffic circulation could incorporate longer-term materials to replace the delinear posts as well as additional signage. The pros of this option are that wouldn't introduce any new changes to traffic circulation, and it would continue to serve the cyclists utilizing the pilot facility. The cons include the legislative uncertainty, both in getting the legislation to be passed, as well as the timeline to deliver that state law change. Also, it wouldn't address the visibility safety concern with parking left wheel to the curb. And there are limits to what additional signage can do to address the feel of it as a one-way with the visual cue of the parked cars on both sides of the street in the one-way direction. Also includes the comment on motor vehicles when it's functioning as a one-way street, positioning in the middle of the street. So option 2 is to make Kains and Adams fully two-way. This would function similar to the adjacent streets, Madison or Stanage to the east and west. If significant diversion of traffic was observed, there is the potential to add median diverters and restrict to right-in, right-out movements to control that, which would introduce new circulation changes. So this diagram on the right reflecting that there would be new right-in movements and right-out movements in the contraflow to the current one-way direction, but there would be restrictions on where you currently could go through from one block to the next or make a left into the new block would be a new restriction. Example of a similar installation at Cedar and 9th Street in Berkeley. So this is looking west along Cedar. 9th Street is the bicycle facility. Bikes can proceed through, but vehicles approaching from the right or left would have to turn right out. Pros of this option are that it would simplify the roadway configuration. It would provide new motor vehicle local access, and it would potentially slow vehicle speeds with the switch to two-way traffic on the narrow street. The cons to this option are that it has the potential to create new bottlenecks with narrow travel lanes, including potential impacts to emergency response time. It has the potential to create new traffic diversion from San Paulo Avenue, and if that were to be the case, the potential to need traffic diverters and changes to circulation to address that. So option 3 would be to return to one-way direction for some parts of Kains and Adams where there is a viable parallel street that could serve the two-way facility. So for Kains, this could divert on Garfield over to Stanage. For Adams, this could divert over on Washington to Jackson. Pros for this option are that east of San Pablo, Stanage provides a potential cycling facility on a lower volume street with all-way stop control, facilitating cyclist through movements already in place with our traffic management. For west of San Pablo, Jackson provides all-way stop control at Washington and Solano, facilitating the through movements, and it reduces the potential to create new bottlenecks with narrow travel lanes, including the potential impacts to emergency response time for the blocks remaining one way. The cons here are that it reduces cycling access to destinations on San Pablo Avenue and reduces cycling access for the residents and destinations on Kains and Adams for the blocks that are reverting to the one-way direction. So with that, staff is recommending option 2, the conversion of Kains Avenue between Marin Avenue and Brighton Avenue and Adams Street between Buchanan Street and Clay Street to two-way motor vehicle traffic. We find that the legislative uncertainty regarding changing the vehicle code is a serious issue with option 1. At the same time, option 2 continues to provide the two-way bicycle facility while addressing the visibility issue with parking with the left wheel to the curb on a narrow roadway. We've heard strong concerns around the potential to divert additional traffic onto Kains and Adams with this option, and have identified the use of median diverters as an appropriate tool to address this issue if it arises. And with that, I'm sure we'll have questions and discussion. Thank you.
Questions from the commission, and I know everybody has a lot to say about this topic, so let's make sure that in this phase of discussion, we're really just asking clarifying questions about factual subjects, and we'll get into all of our opinions and preferences a little bit later. Questions?
I guess I had a question for staff about how this interacts with the Alameda County plans for this low stress route. Like, what obligations do we have to this plan for implementing our part of it? I know that there's still a lot to be done in Berkeley as well. And as far as I know, there is no plan for Contra Costa County to link up, or no concrete plan. But how does that factor in to this recommendation?
Options 1 and 2 that maintain the existing configuration would mesh with the proposed improvements for the Alameda CTC parallel bike routes project. Mm-hmm. Option 3 is the one that would have more significant coordination issues, because currently the planning on the Berkeley side is for it to be approaching on Kains through there. So it would have coordination with Berkeley around that potential change. And their current project includes crossing improvements at Kains Solano and at Kains Marin. So those would be impacted.
Okay, thank you.
So we received 18 emails from the public, and some of them expressed that, well, we can keep the bike two-way, but they want the vehicular traffic to be one-way. So I just want to make sure and make it clear that that's not possible, right? So if we want the bikes to be two-way, then the vehicular traffic has to be two-way, correct?
The two alternatives that were looked at in the study were what's currently there, where it's internally two-way with entrance restriction, or a contraflow bicycle lane that essentially all the vehicle movements were one way, but there was a 5.5 foot, I think, bicycle lane in the contraflow direction. Those were the two design concepts that presented.
So basically, without a dedicated bike lane, both bike and the vehicular traffic has to be two-way, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, yeah, I just want to, for clarification for myself and also for the public.
And the dedicated contraflow bike lane would require parking reductions, I'm assuming?
So there were alternatives that had parking reduction in the study from 2017. The one that didn't had I believe it was 5.5 foot, somewhere like 5.5 or 6 feet bicycle lane. The issue there was that it was directly adjacent to the
Yeah.
parking lane.
Yeah, it sounds
and
unworkable.
the visibility issue that I identify with the current configuration was the bicyclists had to be even closer to the vehicle.
So all the dangers that we have with contraflow parking now, but exaggerated because the bikes would be forced into a place that's even harder to see for drivers pulling out of parking spaces, right?
That's correct. So the comparison at the time that was made was if you're in the middle of the bike lane, you only have like 3 or 4 feet, or even if you're hugging the left side of the contraflow bicycle lane, you're within a narrow band and are less visible to the vehicle pulling, the driver pulling out for longer. If you have a two-way street and can be in the middle of a vehicle lane in the contraflow direction, you can be further away from the parked cars. The issue that's been raised with vehicles driving in the middle of the street maybe pushes back on that idea a little bit, and that the cyclist maybe is positioning further over than in the center of it as a two-way street they would, but I don't have observation data of where cyclists are positioning themselves.
Other questions on this side? Cool.
This is just a quick one. On page 5 of the staff report, in the middle, there's a paragraph that starts Albany Fire Department, which I found a little difficult to understand. It says Albany Fire Department has a general preference for one-way streets for speed of access. While fire department staff raised a concern that making Kains and Adams fully two-way increases the chance of bottlenecks with vehicles in the opposing direction slowing emergency response, particularly with Adams Street near the fire station, they did not have specific issues to warrant opposing this alternative. I just thought the last sentence contradicted the rest of the paragraph because it seems like they did have specific concerns. So I was just questioning, one more brief question, but let me do the brief question first. These streets are 30 feet wide, as many are in Albany. And in the diagrams you saw in the Parisi report, there's 7 feet on either side reserved for parking. So two-lane streets have an 8-foot travel lane in each direction. Is that fair? So is that wide enough for a fire truck in an 8-foot lane? The reason I ask this because we had a huge problem on Washington Street where it dives down to Pierce Street because it wasn't wide enough for a fire truck, and we went through all kinds of conniptions to figure out how to solve that problem. And granted, on Stanage and Cornell, it must already be a problem. But the question is, in general, with an 8-foot travel lane, is that big enough for a fire truck to maneuver on the street and get its doors open?
So you had 2 questions there. The first one on the language in the memo. Generally, they prefer one-way streets. Those are wider, easier for them to maneuver, faster for them. They didn't have a specific concern with this configuration due to the reason you raised, that it's similar to other 30-foot streets. So there's not something special about this one that raises their concern level beyond that it's another 30-foot street that does have some difficulty with maneuvering. If the difference for Washington, I'd have to go back and look at the widths, but it's 8 feet is not what we would standard do with like a new travel lane. It's the condition we have with a number of our roadways.
That's fine, thank you.
More questions? Ken? I have a couple questions. Lost track of what page it was on. The car traffic counts. There it is. So are some of these numbers showing illegal driving patterns? The 11,
The pre-project,
is that showing the number of people that were driving the wrong way on a one-way street before the project was built?
yes, entering the intersection northbound on Kains, there was an illegal maneuver pre-project.
And it wasn't just an illegal entry of Kains, but it was driving north on Kains at a time when it was actually one-way south. Okay, that's really interesting that there were that many people doing that. My other question is about the medians. When you showed the example of 9th and Cedar, my impression of using that median, well, let me give another example first. When I use the median at California and Dwight, I'm able to ride my bike across one lane of Dwight and then stop in the median, and my bike is completely contained in the median, and while I wait for the other direction of Dwight to clear, and then I pass through. 9th and Cedar, maybe not quite, but I still could sort of try to do that. What is the, like, what are the boundaries for how long or how wide or narrow a median should be? Would it necessarily be wide enough to accommodate a bike waiting there, or is there such a thing as a median that is just like a single strip of cement that you find at the front of a parking space in a parking lot that's just like saying you can't turn across this, but it's also not a place to wait? Is that a possibility?
I think that would be a possibility. It might end up being what we have the width for here. Our east-west streets are wider generally, but they might not be as wide as the other
And
examples.
it looked like some of the concerns about using those medians were about the width of the street. But if the median was made that thin, is there still a concern that it would impede like emergency vehicle turning movements and things?
The emergency vehicle comment was more around oncoming traffic not finding a place to pull over, not about navigating the median diverter.
So when you think about using these medians, do they bring up any problems that make it, like, is it just a no-brainer that anywhere we wanted, we could drop one of those medians on the ground and it would work? Or are there going to be places where staff would look at it or engineers would look at it and say, no, we actually can't put a median here?
It's likely more the circulation impact that putting a bunch of them in will make it more tricky navigating around.
So no single median is going to be a showstopper. It's how many.
We haven't looked at the geometry of particular intersections, so there's possible that certain places we would not be able to install or would have to think about different designs. We haven't gotten to that level.
Okay. That's it for my questions. So
I was just to make sure I was giving you accurate information. The entering the intersection northbound on Kains, so that's coming to Solano, not leaving Solano. So it's still the the wrong way direction, but just to make sure that it's arriving at Solano.
It's arriving at
northbound,
Solano from
departing the
from
intersection.
YMCA. Okay, I think we're ready for public comment. It looks to me like we have about 10 people in the room. Can you give me an idea of how many people are online?
Yeah, we have 14 attendees online, and we currently have 6 hands raised, and we're getting more.
I'm guessing that most of the 14 will probably raise their hands. So let's assume we have 25 people making comments. I'm thinking maybe 2 minutes.
About 2.5.
A little over an hour with all the turnaround time, maybe an hour and a quarter of public comment. Takes us to 9 o'clock. Okay, 2.5 minutes.
Sorry, Chair, I'm just trying to figure out if we can actually do that on our machine here.
Oh, okay.
You could just let them go 30 seconds into the red.
I figured it out. We got it. It's just going to take a little bit of pumping the button here.
Oh, do you have
Okay.
to do that every time?
I don't think so. Should be able to repeat it.
We'll reset to that, okay.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll start with people in the room. I would suggest maybe letting the people with kids go first. So
Yeah.
since they have to make a quick exit afterwards.
Thanks for your conscientiousness around that. My concern about reverting to fully two-way traffic is that it doesn't actually make anything safer for the cyclists on Kains and Adams. And so if the primary concern is that the lack of visibility of the cars pulling out on the left-hand side of traffic can't see the bikes, for bikes, it's much less safe for us to bike safely with fully two-way traffic on quite narrow streets, such as Kains and Adams are. We use the Kains Bikeway every day, multiple times a day, to take her to daycare. And eventually, the hope is that she will be able to bike independently. And if Kains returns to a two-way bikeway or two-way traffic for cars, that makes that feel much less safe and much less doable. And there's not really many bikeway options other than the greenway that are fully protected. So some semblance of safety on north-south traffic feels imperative. That's it.
Thank you. Did you want to make a comment too?
Yes, hello, my name is Max Klein. This is my family. I'm pleased that my wife got to speak before we have to take the child home. We've lived at Kains Avenue for 4 years. Currently, we live at Kains and Portland. My first point, I have 3 points to make. So the first is that the bike point in the 24-hour count, I think that data, it is low sample, but one thing I noticed is that if you total all of those up, then you have, before the pilot project, 310 people cycling on the day, and then afterwards 336, which represents 8% increase in cycling. So I do think that the data show that the pilot project is motivating people to cycle more. As my wife said, we are one of them. We use this every day, and we view it as a vital piece of infrastructure. Regarding the safety of left turn lanes, I do actually see the importance of the fact that it is some danger for the left parking. However, the most important thing that I think in safety is speed. So conflicts that happen with left parking happen at, with parked cars maybe traveling up to 5 miles per hour. In two-way traffic, that's more like 20 miles per hour. So I think relatively the left parking is, despite being potentially an unsafe choice, is safer than fully two-way traffic. And the third thing is I just really want to urge the committee to make a progressive choice. Gas prices are only getting higher. Road deaths in America are at an all-time high at 40,000 people per year. We have an option to really prioritize alternative modes of transit, and I think option 1 is really the way to do it, and I feel that option 2 gives priorities to cars and is more of the same. So I really urge option 1. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's just take this side of the room first, since you're close to the mic.
I have a question. Can people standing at the podium see the countdown timer?
Did you see it when you were standing at the podium?
Is the timer movable? Yes, but it's not where they're looking. They're looking at us.
Should we move the podium, or?
It's a little better.
We don't have to see.
We don't have to see it. You can turn it completely towards the podium.
Okay, that's better. Wait, can you see the timer clearly before you start?
Sorry, say it
Can you
again?
see the timer clearly before you start?
Yeah, I see numbers all over the place.
All around you. Go ahead.
So my name is Clay Larson. There's a lot to talk about here, and there's only 2.5 minutes. I sent some comments that are more detail. I do think the reason why staff is proposing a change in the pilot before the pilot is completed is because the pilot was a failure. And why was it a failure? Library closing here. But why was it a failure? It was a failure because of parking. Who knew? Well, I knew. I pointed out the parking was an issue from the first meeting, but the council, the commission, the council, and ultimately the city kicked the can down the road, and we have this problem. It's illegal for a bicyclist to ride in the wrong way of the streets. It's illegal because it's dangerous, especially on narrow streets like Kains and Adams. The main danger here is the possibility of collision with a car parked, pulling out from the bicyclist side of the roadway directly into traffic. This is exactly the situation we have with wrong way parking now on Kains and Adams. The city has done nothing to mitigate the dangers. They haven't enforced the law, and in doing that, they doomed the project. This project was doomed to failure. We haven't created a safe bikeway for cyclists. We've created a dangerous situation. The city has proposed 3 options. Option 1 obviously doesn't solve the safety concerns since we still have wrong way parking. It repeats the Walter Mitty-esque delusions about Albany getting an exemption in state law. It's never going to happen for the reasons I noted in my email. Option 2 ignores the 65-plus year history of these 2 streets being one way and the reasons why they were one way. Option 3 is complicated, and I don't think it's justified by the, I mean, it reduces the Adams Street segment to 2 blocks. I don't think it's justified based on the very, very small, less than 10 number of cyclists that are using Adams to in this case, to go south. I did quickly look at some of the emails, and I noticed that we're repeating the nonsense about the small number of one-way streets in Berkeley being instructive here. These are low traffic streets, and they're wider. They're 6 feet wider. 6 feet, that's bigger than a bike lane. So the simple-minded comparisons are not appropriate. I guess that'll do it.
Thank you. Next. So if you think you're going to be speaking next, you could stand up and be ready to step to the mic when the person finishes. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Christina Osborne. I live on the 800 block of Adams Street. I wrote a letter, but it didn't get to you in time. It was a little after 12, but I hope you were able to read it. I am concerned about this pilot program. It was poorly designed, it was not well thought out, and it was inadequately implemented. It wasn't until I went to the city council and complained about a confrontation I had with another driver who insisted I was going the wrong way on Adams Street and wouldn't let me pass, that they actually, this was in June, that they actually put up some signs that said this is now a 2-way road with 2 arrows. People, see those signs, though, believe that that's only for bicycles, and I still get yelled at. When I come out of my driveway on Adams and I go south, which I'm legally able to do now, I get yelled at by drivers and bicyclists who yell at me, swear at me, call me names, and tell me I'm going the wrong way, that it's only two-way for bicyclists. If this program, pilot project, is meant to be successful, it needs to be done correctly and adequately. There was no signage until June. You took down the one-way signs, and people were supposed to know then when a one-way sign was gone. Suddenly now it's a two-way road, but that didn't work. I have lived on Adams Street for over 30 years, and I do not feel safe when I go out onto that street now because I never know what I'm going to come up with on cars. And as it was mentioned before, the cars parking, all the cars are parked one direction, so it looks like a one-way street, which adds to the confusion of other drivers coming on that street. Most of the drivers and bicyclists are from out of town. They didn't get your little flyers, they didn't get your little card saying that there were traffic changes. This needs to go back to the way it was and make Madison and Stanage would be wonderful options. They're already two-way streets. You do not have to change all the rules. And it would be much less confusing and much less dangerous to people, both drivers and bicyclists. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, my name is Steve Price. I actually live in El Cerrito, but I often go down Kains at least 2 or 3 times a week to get to Souvenir Coffee and Royal Grounds Coffee. And I'm finding actually that when this improvement was implemented, I actually significantly increased my use of Kains. I actually find it a very comfortable bicycle route now. I don't have any, I can't think of it. I have, for all these months of taking that route, I can't recall ever actually having any kind of encounter with somebody pulling out from a parked lane on the east side of the street. So I think it's maybe something that is maybe a conflict that's going to be so infrequent that it's probably not worth being that concerned about. And I think if there is concerns about whether this is working or not, maybe just a few months pilot isn't maybe long enough. Maybe we should just continue with the pilot and just really at the end of that, maybe a year's time, then make an evaluation. But so far I can say that as a user, it's been working out pretty good for me. Thank you.
Are you a cyclist or a driver?
I'm a cyclist. Yeah, I'm bicycling on there.
Good evening, Commission. Nick Pilch, Albany resident. Why is this evaluation occurring at the 8-month mark? I would greatly appreciate an answer from staff on this. From all that I can tell, and including the staff report, the project is a success. The only issue has been lack of awareness from some residents, and it was agreed, and everyone says that better signage was and is needed. Any change causes confusion at first among those affected. My own impression is that it improved my own cycling life by increasing my options for quiet streets to ride on. The biggest concern comes from staff. They're concerned about people parked the wrong way, and it's baffling. And what are the limits to additional signage as stated in the staff report? It seems like signage just has not gone up and has not been thought through and is inadequate. I don't know what limitations are spoken of there. If parking the wrong way is such a problem, why haven't police ticketed and or written warnings in the 8 months? And why does the city is concerned about these violations and not about violations such as blocking the sidewalks by people parked in their driveway, which the city didn't care about for years until I brought it up when I was on council, and then they decided to enforce it. Why does the city still allow people to park on the sidewalks as on Pierce Street and not enforce that? Why are they concerned with this particular violation? Why would the city be so concerned with these violations when moving violations, such as speeding, running stop signs and red lights, continue to be such a problem and can and have resulted in injury and death. No issues have been reported during this pilot for this concern. And why would the neighboring city, Berkeley, allow wrong-way parking on many streets with no enforcement? I don't know why incorrectly parked cars would pose a hazard at all, actually. These vehicles have a line of sight to the bicycle approaching them and can see if they're going to pull out, that someone is approaching them. Actually, I'm more concerned about the being doored by people parked the correct way on a street, just as I'm concerned with people people parked front way in, backing out into the motor vehicle lane. Thank you.
And we'll move on to this side. Someone, come on. We already are on that side. Yeah. While a person is talking, if the next person would get in line behind them, that would be great.
Hello, my name is Estrella Sainberg, and I am a user of Kains Street to get from the south side of Marin to the YMCA. I don't have a car, so usually I try to make it over to Trader Joe's before it closes after arriving at the YMCA. And I can do this all in a very stress-free manner and very safely. I just moved to town in May, and so I've been doing this since May, and people that have moved into town are now using this and benefiting from this. I'm also, if the data was collected in May for this pilot program, I question people that were not in town at that time. The YMCA attendance has significantly increased when September came around. And so I do, I think that summer includes May, and graduate students and students are done with UC Berkeley and other schools by May. Other than that, safety is a priority, and I, favor the option that it's working as it is, and not that today is an indicator of every day, but on my walk over here down Kains between Marin and Solano, there was not one car parked in the wrong direction. So I will look out for that more now. And I think, let me see. There was a comment submitted about climate change concerns and greenhouse gas emissions, and I think we should take that seriously, our own climate action plan, and how two-way road would increase car usage and make bike users feel less safe and welcome there. Right now, that is our alternative to San Paulo and our alternative to the Greenway if we're more so in that part of town. So I definitely think we should try to live up to those climate action goals. And other than that, I think those are my main comments. So I support the road as it is now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Here's the clock. Hi, I'm Amy Smolens. I've lived on the 900 block of Kains for 31 years. This project, Kains and Adams Bicycle Boulevard and Traffic Calming Project, has been discussed in city meetings since 2011. So more than a decade of public process and discussion led to this current configuration. So I don't understand how traffic counts taken in May, when many neighbors didn't fully understand the circulation, and as you pointed out, signage was nowhere near complete, can somehow be considered conclusive. In addition, as I sent in the email, mapping and directional apps still don't reflect the current configuration. I sent you very specific examples with maps about how cyclists are not directed via the bike boulevards, drivers are not directed in the proper direction out. So 5 months after these counts were taken, now more people have at least discovered the existence of the bike boulevard, but they're doing it because they live here or because they find out by word of mouth. Look out my window, I see people biking, families, elderly, everybody, biking to the Y, biking to Access San Pablo, to Solano, everywhere, and numbers will absolutely rise once the directional apps reflect reality. That's how a lot of people get where they're going. in the middle of the staff report is this important line. Staff has not identified any vehicle collisions related to the pilot design since installation. So that's significant, and that's not surprising, because the 48-year pilot of similar bicycle boulevards has been successfully creating safer bikeways in Berkeley. We're not reinventing the wheel. We're just following in those known tire tracks. 48 years of bicycle boulevards with contraflow parking, no problems. It's been fine. Like anything else, anything new, there's a learning curve. So 48 years in Berkeley prove that the configuration works. It just takes more than 8 months for people to understand it and to use it. Contraflow parking causes 0 problems. If anything, we're not going to get doored when we're on our bikes. All you guys have probably been doored or come close. It's not going to happen. They're looking right at us, and it's the passenger side. Please don't water down the only bicycle boulevard that Albany has. These are it, okay? So you're our active transportation advisory body, so please vote for option 1 with improvements such as daylighting and stop signs at intersections. Thank you.
I just want to second the comments about the signage. I don't drive on Adams Street for any reason. I drive only on the 900 block of Kains. Don't have reason to drive on any of the others. I don't drive a bicycle. I'm beyond bicycles, have been for a number of years. They're just not feasible for me. I do support the idea of promoting bicycle usage. I think that's a good idea. But my comment about this pilot project is that it's not done. The year is not up. You don't have the signs. It hasn't even started yet because the signage is not sufficient to let people know what's going on. I'm really concerned that Ms. Osborne's comments have basically been ignored as far as I can tell. But I know that I've tried driving north on the 900 block of Kains Avenue, and it's extremely difficult because cars are coming the other way. Trucks are coming the other way. The street, that particular block, is extremely impacted by traffic from the YMCA. There, the street is always, there's seldom any parking except on the extreme south end. Occasionally you can find a parking spot on the 900 block of Kains. And that's because of the Y. YMCA is just has a tremendous impact on that block of Kains. So anyway, I think I'm in favor of bicycles. I think it's good, but I think this project has to have a longer test than it has. You haven't notified the users of these roads what the rules are. And if you don't know the rules, you can't follow anything. There's nothing to follow. So I encourage you somehow to get adequate signage up to let people know, and then you can give the project a real test to see if it is right or not. So thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Ellen Davis Zapata, and I also live on Kains Avenue in the 900 block. And I've lived there about 18 years. And I too get yelled at, and all kinds of signals and everything that I'm driving down the wrong way, because anytime I go north and there's someone coming, even neighbors will yell at me, you know, and they still don't understand that it's a two-way street for cars. And I'm not too sure it's signage, and I know that the staff put out postcards and everything, and people just don't read. I think the trouble is that the south end is blocked off at Marin Avenue, and so of course cars are going to be parked the easiest way. They're coming from the north to the south, and they'll park on either side of the street that they can find parking on, going that way. The only way that the parking will on the east side will turn around and go the right way is if people are allowed to drive from Marin Avenue north and turn on Marin Avenue onto Kains Avenue. And so I support the idea of making it permanently two-way and removing the barricade at Marin Avenue. I think then people would just naturally be able to park would naturally park on the right side of the street. And it would be, nobody would need to, argue about it. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Do the people online come in a natural order?
Yes, they're in the order.
And do we have 14? Do we have 14 hands raised at this point?
We have 9 hands raised.
9 hands.
10.
Okay.
So we'll start with the first one on the list here, which is Robert Prins. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Thanks to the committee for taking comments. This is Robert Prins.
Robert, we're not able to hear you.
Let's try a new mic. Is that better?
There we go. That's better now.
Okay. Can you give me a couple more seconds? In any case, this is Robert Prins, Advocacy Director with Bike East Bay. One of our major campaigns this year is San Pablo Avenue Corridor Project, which includes, as you know, the parallel facility on Kains. The intention of that project is to provide a low-stress alternative to biking on San Pablo Avenue. I've ridden both of these corridors, and I do consider them considerably lower stress. I think that they can be better, but part of that low stress comes from not having to worry too much about overtaking car traffic in one direction, and then also the simplified turning movements at the intersections as a function of that some of those turn restrictions have been implemented. I really support the option 1, and I would really encourage this group to recommend not making any changes to this facility, at the very least until the Alameda CTC San Pablo Avenue project can be installed. To my understanding, some of the most difficult design issues with the existing facility are the major roadway crossings like at Marin. But that Alameda CTC project is proposing some significant crossing improvements, which I think will really be important to have in place in order to understand how effective this facility is. With regards to the concerns about the curb parking, something is only illegal insofar as it's enforced. We've encountered this with other issues where City Council has actually just encouraged the police department to deprioritize certain types of enforcement. I'd recommend that be taken as a step in the interim to help provide an avenue for enabling addressing some of those curb parking issues without having to worry about enforcement, at least until some of those official legal changes can be made that you had mentioned. There also are options for counterflow bike lanes next to curbside parking. You can look to some examples in Chicago and Washington, D.C. And the NACTO also has some recommendations for advisory bike lanes that you could look into as design options. There's an Alto paper on that. I'd be happy to talk through some additional design opportunities here that I think could help address some of those ongoing issues in the interim. And staff or committee members are welcome to get in touch with me offline to talk through some of those and share experiences. But thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have Maxwell Gara. Please go ahead.
Hey, Commissioners. My name is Max Gara. Can you guys hear me? Yes. My name is Max. I live on the 600 block of Kains. I want to express my strong support for the Kains and Adams Bikeway pilot project and request that the city permanently implement the bikeways as proposed in option 1. The city should also make safety upgrades to ensure the projects achieve its goal of creating a safer, low-stress bikeway. The Kains Bikeway has been an invaluable resource to our family for accessing many different parts of Albany. In particular, my wife, who is new to biking, feels much more confident riding on this bikeway. We use the Bikeway nearly every day to get around town, whether it's going grocery shopping at El Cerrito Plaza, grabbing ice cream at Dewey's, or taking our daughter to and from preschool in West Berkeley. Over the past 10 months following the Bikeway's installation, we have seen more and more cyclists, especially families, use the Bikeway, and we're excited for its growing popularity and hope that this momentum continues. In addition to maintaining the Bikeway, we would like to see additional safety improvements be made to ensure more bicycle riders of varying ability can comfortably use these bikeways. The biggest challenges we've faced on these roads have been associated with vehicle speed, volume, and unsafe passing distances. During commute hours, car traffic can be heavy, with drivers more likely to aggressively honk their horns, tailgate, pass bicyclists with punishingly little buffer. When bicycling in the counterflow direction, oncoming cars often do not slow down or move out of the bicyclist path, continuing directly down the middle of the road. One issue I haven't had is conflict with cars pulling out from their parking space on the left-hand side of the road. So at a minimum, the following safety changes I think should be made: adding stop signs or traffic circles at the intersections of along the Bikeway, and adding speed bumps along the entirety of the bikeways. This pilot has been a great opportunity to evaluate and learn what has worked and what needs improvement. And while the current Bikeway configuration is a strong step in the right direction, more needs to be done to make them safer. Our daughter is 3.5 years old and will soon be riding her own bike, and we want to be confident that the streets that she rides on are safe and accessible to her and other kids like her. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Next is Sarah Yang. Please go ahead.
Hi, Commissioners. My name is Sarah Yang, and I'm a resident who's lived on the 900 block of Adams Street for 19 years. I occasionally commute to UC Berkeley by bike, going along San Pablo, actually, and then up Marin to the Ohlone Greenway. I'd like to express my strong opposition to turning Adams into a fully two-way street, which I think was presented as option 2 today in the report. I just think that would create hazards unnecessarily. I heard today that allowing bikes to travel in either direction on Adams would require bike lanes, and I support the commission looking into that more. I didn't really know much about the laws related to that. So when biking, I'd rather have a predictable direction for the cars on the road I'm traveling on, and keeping the street one way for northbound vehicle traffic, I feel, is orderly and predictable. And for that reason, I would actually support one-way traffic flow on Adams. I heard in the report that bicyclists were uncomfortable about cars traveling in the middle of the road on one-way streets, and I'm not really sure how making the street two-way would help because of the narrow width of the road. It's not as if two cars could easily pass each other going in opposite directions. So I think if safety is the goal, I think that opening up Adams to southbound through traffic would decrease safety, allowing, adding confusion and congestion. So I do think it would be great for bicyclists to go in either direction. I have no objection to that if we can find a way to do that legally. I just feel like having traffic going through, car traffic going in both directions just will add to the risk and the danger. So thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Next is David S. Please go ahead.
I'm David Treatman. I've lived on the 900 block of Kains Street for 8 years. Basic thing is I am against plans 1 and 2. I think 3 could be okay, but I don't live in the area that would be turned into a 2-lane street, so I would kind of defer to the people that live there. The problems with both 1 and 2 is just the street's not wide enough. We've talked about the issues with the cars that are contra-flowed parking, pulling out into bikes, but nobody's mentioned that the cars like myself that pull out and go southbound on Kains, when there's a car parked right next to us, parked in the street, we pretty much have to pull all the way out and then into the bike lane on the left side of the street in order to get our cars out. So every single, I would say probably 80 to 90% of the time I pull out of my house, there's a potential head-on collision with a bike, 80% of the time. And the only reason that doesn't happen is just because the flow of bikes right now is really low. As we've noticed from the numbers, they haven't really gone up much. So this is kind of just a safety problem that's going to happen as soon as the numbers go up and we start getting more and more cars there. So again, unless there's a plan to actually widen the street, I am very much against plans 1 and 2. Plan 3 could be fine depending on how the details are at the other parts of the city. And one note on the citations from earlier, there was a car that actually hit our house and took off, and I gave the video of the car leaving to the police, and the person still did not receive a citation. So that's why these citations are down, in my opinion. Okay, thank you.
Thank you for your comment.
I have a question for that commenter. Are they still on?
They are still able to speak.
Oh, okay, I'm still here.
Yeah, so you mentioned a citation. Can you perhaps tell us how that was related to this pilot?
Oh, after the car hit our house, he exited through the northbound out of Kains. So he used the new availability to escape after hitting my house.
Was he traveling northbound when he hit your house?
No, he was pulled into our driveway and was backing in and out of our driveway, which again would be the problem with having more through traffic on our street.
So this is a person having a problem controlling their car that backed into your house, and then they left northbound.
Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Elaine Stelton. Please go ahead.
Hi, the gentleman who spoke just a few moments ago, David, is a resident of my building, and he was kind enough to share the video of a Uber food delivery person who pulled in to our driveway because there is diminished parking on Kains, and he needed to pick up food on San Pablo. So he illegally pulled into our driveway, and then he probably got another call to deliver more food, and his quickest exit would be Solano. So on his way out, and we have it all on film thanks to David, so we're happy to send it to you. He damaged the building and he scratched his own car on another car. Anyway, I've just seen some horrible driving since Kains became two-way. And I do have some concerns about the lovely people who go to the Y, and I just got a Y membership myself. Some of them are quite elderly and do not have the quick reflexes to respond to, let's say, a bike coming at them unexpectedly, because again, the signage on the street is incredibly poor. And people who have been dealing with the pilot program the whole time have told me, you know, even their neighbors yell at them for going up the street in the wrong direction. Everybody is just completely confused due to the lack of proper signage, and also the fact that the cars still park in the direction they've always parked is kind of a visual indication to keep going in the direction you've always gone your entire life. And that's what they're doing. With regard to climate action, I just wanted to mention, because of the diminished parking on Kains and also diminished parking on Solano due to the parklets, you do have to drive around quite a bit to find a parking space. So I do have to go to take out the trash cans once a week. My usual parking space is no longer available on Kains, and I oftentimes have to circle, which doesn't really forward your climate action plans. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment.
Next is Marion Snyderman. Please go ahead.
This is Matt. Marion's right here next to me. We're 20-year residents on Kains, and I want to say I like, as a cyclist and a motorist, I much prefer a one-way street. I find them far more predictable than two-way traffic. I do worry and have had a couple of near misses, not on Kains necessarily, but with people opening their doors, whether it's driver side or passenger side. People sometimes just don't look. And I'm also concerned about, with the current pilot, the notion if people were using the two-way the way it's designed, there would be a lot more people doing three-point turns in their driveways to point in the right direction on Kains going northbound. And actually, three-point turns worry me a lot more than the people who are pulling out of parking spaces, really. And so that's really my take on it. I'd prefer it go back to being just a straight one-way street.
Thank you for your
Thank
comment.
you.
Next is a phone number ending in 840. Please press *6 on your phone in order to unmute yourself.
Hey, my name's Brian Martin. I'm a resident of the 600 block of Adams Street, and I'm in favor of option number 1. I've received all sorts of literature from people on Adams and maybe Kains saying how horrific this project was going to be, how many accidents there were going to be, how dangerous everything was, how the first responders were going to be slowed down. And none of that came true. Absolutely none of that came true in my experience. So in that sense alone, it's been a great success. We are all in our area worried about the bowling alley project going in with over 200 new homes and less than 180 parking spaces that people will have to pay for, and not everyone will want to pay. They'll have free parking on our street. And we in Albany need more infrastructure for non-car transportation to help people get around with fewer or no cars. And this is one of the things that the city can do, is to install something that allows for two-way bicycle travel, which this option number 1 does, that I encourage the commission to approve to further. And while keeping car traffic just two-way only internal, I 100% agree with people that say the signage needs to be improved to help road rage that some people are experiencing. I've experienced none of that, but I'm not diminishing what some other people have experienced. And so the city needs to have some better signage. Of course, there's some transition for any new traffic flow. The good news is we see in Berkeley several blocks that are identical in traffic flow to what we have now on Adams and Kains. And their own traffic director, Berkeley's own, has said that there's been no problems whatsoever in roughly 50 years. One of Albany City Council members looked at all of the collision data on those blocks in Berkeley over the last 9 years, which is all the data that's available, and found, as I recall, at a public meeting, said there were 0 traffic accidents. Injury related was what the data was for. So I'm not sure why and as others have said, the police can prioritize. So I'm not sure why the city's beating itself up over.
Thank you, Brian. Your time is up now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. No, on the phone, they can't see the timer. Next up, we have Carrie Schulman. Please go ahead.
Hello. First of all, thank you, commissioners, for listening to all these comments and doing your best to listen to everybody. Thank you for that. I take between Washington and Solano, we take Kains every day to get to and from Ocean View Elementary School. We only do that one block of Kains because my kids are not very good at intersections where there's a two-way stop, but so they have to go across cross traffic. They forget to stop and look for cars way down the block. So I'd really appreciate if there could be more stop signs put in so that cross traffic is not crossing the boulevard, because my kids really struggle with that. And I haven't heard a lot of people talk about adding like anything to reduce the traffic. I feel like especially on that block on Kains between Washington and Solano, there's a lot of car volume on that block, which makes it less ideal for biking. We take it anyway, but it would be much more comfortable if there was fewer cars there. I'd actually was supporting number 2 if you could put in the intersection blocker at Washington and Kains, which would reduce the number of cars that are using that block of Kains there. I think that would be a really good tool for reducing car traffic on Kains and make it a better experience for cyclists. I adamantly oppose option number 3 because the whole purpose of this is to have a parallel route with San Pablo Avenue, and there's a lot of things that are going to be going in, as mentioned before, to help people on Kains cross Solano and Marin, and those things are not on Stanage, so rerouting the bicycle route to Stanage is not a good option. The bicycle route should be on Kains, but anything you can do to reduce car traffic on Kains would be greatly appreciated, but please continue bike traffic in both directions for the length of Kains. And thank you very much. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Next up is Georgi Zaiba. Please go ahead. Oh, just lost that one. Please raise your hand again if you would like to speak. But the next one we have now is Jonah Bush. Please go ahead, Jonah.
Good evening, commissioners. My name is Jonah Bush. My wife and I have lived on Kains Avenue north of Portland for the last 6 months. We love it here and we hope to live here for the next 30 years. I comment in support of option 1, making the current configuration permanent and using signs and paint to address what really sound like minor issues. Our family does not own a car. We are deeply concerned about climate change and want to do what we can for the climate through our everyday personal actions, which includes biking. We get everywhere we need to go on a regular basis with our e-bike, along with walking and public transportation. We love that Albany is a place where this is really possible. I urge Albany to continue making road infrastructure even more bike-friendly and climate-friendly, rather than going backward. We're also very concerned about safety for biking, especially now that we are expecting our first child in 4 months. Kains is a really important part of Albany's network of safe biking streets. We bike on Kains Avenue 2 to 3 times a week. We like the current configuration and find it to be low stress for biking. We take this low stress bike corridor for granted at this point, and we would be quite aggrieved to lose it. With that in mind, I strongly support keeping 2-way bike traffic and maintaining 1-way car traffic. Please address any minor issues with signs and with paint and with traffic improvements to make the street even more safe. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, now we have Georgi Zaiba. Please go ahead.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to express my comments. I live on the 500 block of Talbot Avenue. I have a young family. I have a few kids, and I actually bike on a regular basis and on the Kains Avenue. Primarily when I want to go to Lower Solano or areas that are to the west of San Pablo Avenue. The changes that have been done, and option 1 actually is the one that proposes to continue them. I find them very advantageous, for not advantageous, but very they make it very possible for cyclists who were not able to, or brave enough to bike in the area. Now they make it more safer, feel more safer for them. I wanted to say that somebody said earlier that speed is the biggest concern when it comes to accidents and and safety. I wanted to echo for that. The contraflow parking is actually not much about speed. Like the speeds for pulling out is something like 5 miles per hour. The biggest concern is cars driving through, and those can happen at 20 miles plus in the area there. So I actually feel it much safer when I bike in the direction where there is contraflow parking, because I feel like whoever is going to open the door, they're not going to door me because they're going to see me. So that I find that actually an advantage. The fact that Berkeley has had this for a long time and they haven't had any concerns, it shows that it works, right? So we should continue with option one. I highly support that, and just wanted to say here that in Netherlands, bicycles on one ways, they're allowed by default. The main reason is that you want to incentivize bicycles and disincentivize driving. So you want to make it shorter path for bicycles. So I think this configuration allows that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next is Nick Peterson. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much. Nick Peterson with Albany Climate Action Collaboration. I've been a resident of Albany for about 30 years, and the Bay Area all my life. I started biking the streets of Berkeley, Albany, Kensington, Oakland when I was 10, 11 years old. So I've been biking the streets for quite a while and have appreciated especially Berkeley's early leaning towards making safe bike passage. I know we're a very car-oriented society, and per Albany's own climate action and adaptation plan goals, we want to reduce car traffic and we want to increase traffic of non-polluting vehicles, and which includes active transportation, which is walking and self-propelling on bikes and whatever. It's a very good way to get around. Myself, who I'm now 66, I'm elderly, retired, and do have physical conditions that limit my ability, but I still do a lot of biking around. And I think it's imperative that the city, to support the climate action plan, do things deliberately that improve the ability of others to bike easily and effectively on certain distributed routes through the city, so it becomes more of a common thing people do. I notice a lot of times when I'm out riding my bike, there aren't that many bike riders out except on the Allotted Greenway, where it's completely isolated for cars. We just can't do that in Albany. The streets are too narrow, and rather than just give up and say, well, we need to preserve free parking and auto traffic priority, which is really what options 2 and 3 do. We need to go through a little bit of discomfort and do the little extra mile to make sure that we actually are giving a priority to those who choose to do the active and clean transportation. So I encourage you to at least revisit the pilot, make it address some of the safety issues. I could see putting striping on the street that when people parked and crossed it, they would realize, oh, their bike's coming the other way. And everybody should realize that and just act more safely. I think actually it is true, the dooring in the same direction is more a problem. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, we have no other hands raised online.
Okay, this is last chance. Anybody else online want to pipe up? Okay, well, that was faster than I expected, and I very much appreciate the many callers and speakers who decided that they didn't have to go on for 2.5 minutes because they said what they needed to say. So let's bring it back for discussion. Is there anything that came up in the public comment that staff wants to respond to before we jump in?
There was a question of why now, and I tried to speak to that in the presentation, but I can address that question. One, which I brought up in the presentation, is that parking current status quo continues to be of concern to the Albany Police Department. It's generated a behavior of non-compliance with parking regulations, and we've been looking at ways to address that, which is what we presented. Related to that, if option one is...
Excuse me, somebody's saying they can't hear you.
Okay, I'll speak. In relation to that, if option one is the desired path, getting direction on that sooner so that we can be working on legislation with the upcoming legislative session would be helpful. And the third is it will take time to design and program any changes, so we wanted to start the discussion now.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Notice for this meeting, was it given to residents of Stanage and Jackson?
No, it was noticed along Kains and Adams.
Thank you.
So does somebody want to start the discussion? Go ahead.
Yeah, I can start. It seems like I'm being taking notes, so 20 people here, and everyone seems, most of the people seems to favor option one, so I'm gonna kind of want to state the pros and cons just to help myself come through the logic to, or also start the conversation. And then so option one basically is keep the current situation, right? And I think that's benefiting for...
Can you make sure the mic is in front of your face?
Oh, I think it's benefiting the bicycle by having it both ways, so it's a real corridor. And the second is that it only allows the interblock to go both ways. So that kind of reduced the amount of cars a cyclist has to face. And then with the better signage and more time, maybe this will help. And I feel bad about that lady who has been so many instances of the road rage. It seems like that's more of a traffic issue, but some anger control issue of that specific person. But my only concern is for that option, first, it's really hard for the state to change for a small town of Albany. Secondly, it seems like the city will be liable for some lawsuit if things really go south, right? If we know this, that counterflow parking is dangerous and against state law, and we still allow it, if anything goes, no, this is a question too. This is a question. I mean, will city be sued against it?
Well, actually, you said it was dangerous.
No, sorry. Let me rephrase myself. I mean, it seems like most of the people who are supporting option one are cyclists, and they are actually saying this danger or this risk is controllable, it's maintainable. And even some people saying that drivers have the line of sight and they can see bicyclists coming up. It works. Basically, that's what most of the people who are supporting of option one says. I actually like option one. I just want to avoid the city being sued for in case things go south.
Well, how does like several commenters mentioned, Berkeley has several streets like this, admittedly wider, but how do they avoid any such lawsuits, and how do they avoid friction with their police department and parking enforcement and the state, given that situation that we're facing as well?
I'm happy to chime in because I have a little bit of experience with that. First off, Berkeley doesn't worry about enforcing, the wrong side parking, as it were. It's a very low priority, rarely comes up. Only if there's an issue that's been observed does it get discussed between police staff and traffic engineering staff. But I think to the point that was just raised, I don't think that the wrong side parking is dangerous. It's not dangerous. And I would say that the back out parking on Solano has worse visibility of approaching cars and bikes than this wrong side parking. On top of that, parking on the correct side drivers got to look over their shoulder or remember to look in their mirror to even see the bikes. So they're going to pull out and smack into a bike that's passing by far too easily, I would say more easily than the cars so-called parked on the wrong side. So I dispute that it's unsafe. Looking directly in the direction you're about to travel is about the safest thing possible. And yes, maybe there's a parked car in front of you, or maybe there's a driveway, in which case you got a lot more line of sight. But no one's, for the most part, flying out of these spaces at high speed. And if they were, it's because there's no car in front of them, and again, they got a good line of sight. So I think that there's a lot of argument for why, in this context, it's a good thing. And I would encourage people to continue parking predominantly in the same one-way direction they historically have, because I think it's safer. So I know the state law is an issue. I support advocating for that change. It may not change anytime soon, but we do have the ability to prioritize what we're enforcing. And if we look at it from a Vision Zero perspective, these are not the kinds of low-speed, possible, bump into each other collisions that are leading to fatalities and severe injuries. Speeding, running stop signs, running red lights, those are the ones we should be enforcing, not minor parking violations. So to me, that kind of becomes a non-issue, or should be. I get that there's a concern, but legally it should change. And I think there's a strong argument for that configuration being perceived as actually safer if everyone knows what to expect. And I think,
Finish your thought.
no,
please.
I want to say, because I'm kind of diving into this answer, and I think first off, it's really important to note we've had some really good input from everyone who's spoken tonight. I really appreciate the thoughtful nature of everything that's been shared. It's all valuable, and it's advocating for different solutions. But I'll be pretty blunt. I think option one is the best option, and it needs better signage. And maybe that is painting some two-way arrows on the middle of the street. Maybe it's sending a postcard to everyone on that street that says, you live on a two-way street, and nothing else. Just a link to more information. Because if they're not going to read a flyer, maybe something that's just one sentence that hits the key point that's causing this road rage stuff, because we shouldn't have that between our neighbors in Albany. That's solvable. That's communication, and I think we can get there. So, so many people have commented on that, and I think if that's the biggest obstacle, let's tackle it. Let's deal with it. We can do that. And for the folks who are interested in having diverters at the cross streets, I think that's fine. That's a bigger ticket item, a longer term thing, and I think you could add that option one if you wanted to. So we don't have to go to a different option to get that and reduce the through traffic if that's something that's important. But anyway, I'll leave it at that with one other answer to a question that came up earlier about whether an 8-foot traffic lane is usable by fire trucks. And the answer is only if it's next to another 8-foot traffic lane. If it's between two parked cars, the answer is no. Fire truck's 8 foot wide, the mirrors make it 10 foot wide, it can't fit. So you need to have two traffic lanes side by side, in which case the fire truck will take the middle. And that's fine. They do that all the time. So as long as we've got adequate space for them to get through, we never want to, reduce, but I think that in this case, we're not physically changing the space. So, I hand off because I've had plenty to say.
Before we have more comment, I think the question about what is the problem with contraflow parking and how does Berkeley handle it, I'm glad that Fareed answered. I'd also like to pose that question to staff and see if you want to add anything before we go on.
I don't really know more than what Fareed has conveyed. There isn't special legislation permitting any different configuration in Berkeley. This isn't in response to your question, but I do have a question I would ask just due to the history of knowledge of the commission that extends even farther back than my knowledge of this project. If the contraflow parking is not seen as serious of a safety issue as the others that have been raised, What is the what is the reason we didn't go with the contraflow parking lane? Because that was really the main issue with that alternative. And if that is not our highest safety concern, just for my knowledge of understanding why we didn't go that route would be helpful.
I think it's been answered already, but if I can reiterate, the difference is, you're asking why we went with this configuration instead of a contraflow bike lane?
Yes.
Yeah, a contraflow bike lane that would be adjacent to the main traffic lane, as opposed to a protected one. Yeah, we looked into that, and to the extent that there is a visibility problem of someone pulling out of a parking space, that problem is much worse when the bike rider is directly adjacent to the line of parked cars. So can you bring up the diagram that had that red triangle in it? So if you imagine that bike rider, so the red triangle is where the driver can see, right? So if you imagine the bike rider being flush against the light-colored car, the cyan car, if that's what it is, that's more in the blind spot. If the bike rider is kind of out and generally in some part of that lane, they're more likely to enter the red triangle, which is the high visibility zone. So I think the reasoning was, even with contraflow parking, squeezing the bikes into a lane alongside the parked cars creates more danger. Is that how you remember it?
I'm assuming that eliminating all parking, all automobile parking to make room for a full lane was considered a political non-starter.
Yeah, this was based on parking studies that have been done, one of the few areas in Albany that was near or over capacity for parking. So yeah, eliminating parking, which would have geometrically made it really easy, was politically a non-starter. I think a few public comments about how people parking on the wrong side would be putting the city at risk kind of caused some anxiety about leaving that officially as the recommendation. And so the recommendation was, well, we'll encourage people to park the other way. We may not prioritize enforcement. And that's kind of, I think, evolved somewhat over time. But I think it was based on a fear of saying, if we encouraged people to do something that's technically in violation of the vehicle code, that creates liability. And what I'm saying tonight is that that's ignoring physics. You look at the actual geometry and the actual line of sight, and aside from the argument of, well, people don't expect it, it's better line of sight with this configuration. And so I think the state law is wrong to prohibit it. There are plenty of cases where you don't want people parking on the wrong side of the street. A heavily traveled 2-lane commercial street, you absolutely don't want people doing that. That's what the law is there for. It's not there for this configuration. I would argue that that law doesn't or shouldn't apply to this kind of street, because it's counter to the interest of safety. And as some of the people commented, people making unnecessary 3-point turns in the middle of the street just to park facing the correct way is detrimental to the interest of safety. So we don't want that. I think this is better.
I'd like to add to Commissioner Javedal's comments, and this particular slide would be great to do that on. So yeah, there's a lot of concern about motorists turning out in front of bicycles. But what this picture leaves out is that not only does that driver not know if a cyclist is coming, but they don't know if a car is coming. So they're going to have to exercise some judgment to get out far enough without blocking the road so they can see, because they don't know if there's a car coming. And this kind of situation exists in other places in Albany. For example, on Solano, when you have to get out past the stop bar in Lower Solano, downtown I call it, so that you can see traffic moving on Solano. This is not a unique thing. I'd also like to point out that the visibility triangle that's implied by the red trapezoid is incomplete because your sight doesn't stop 15 feet in front of the car, and the edge of the cyclist would be in that triangle. So it's implying that the cyclist can't be seen, but the geometry says otherwise. So in this configuration, sure, if you're parked hard against the curb and there's a car or a van in front of you, you can't see what's coming. So you have to move your car slowly, carefully, so you can see what's coming. This is a natural thing that we do all the time. For example, backing up on Solano out of an angled parking space. This is not unique. And this is probably one of the main reasons why there haven't been recorded crashes on Kains and Adams. And this is not surprising to me. Slow is a good thing. And this kind of uncertainty can feel very uncomfortable. I want to honor that. But it doesn't necessarily translate to a higher danger. Being uncomfortable and having to take care of your position in an environment can be a good thing for all parties. Discomfort is not something we can always avoid. Let me just follow up by saying I'm really sorry that there was a vehicle that ran into a building, but there's really no proof that that was related to this pilot. There's some anecdotal evidence about the use of the street, but that sort of thing could have happened under any configuration. I'm sorry it happened.
There was also both of those commenters in sequence mentioned reduced parking, but this pilot had no reduced parking that I know about on the 900 block of Kains.
There was some reduction in parking at where the bollards were placed for cyclists to navigate through.
I mean,
so
that's
at
specifically
less than one car's worth of space.
Yes, and specifically the second commenter of those two mentioned the overflow due to parklets.
Oh, okay.
Which is out of the scope of this discussion.
Yeah. Agree.
Maybe something we should discuss another time, but out of the scope of this discussion. I really appreciate all the comments that were made tonight, and sure, I agree with some and less with others. And I'm a strong proponent of option 1+, moving forward and looking at ways to improve the situation. Signage, more paint on the ground, postcards under windshield wipers, whatever it takes. There's obviously a disconnect between what people understand and what is intended with this space. And nobody should be threatened in their person. I certainly don't want that to happen. The San Pablo Avenue corridor is slated for an increase in population and density. The residents of Adams Street near the Albany Bowl project have specifically asked for relief in terms of parking. And one of the ways to do that is to provide all ages and abilities cycling facilities so that people can choose to opt out of driving a car for their around town errands or getting to school or getting to work. This is a benefit for the city, for the residents, for the people who live on those streets. And we're not adding density to Stanage. We're adding density to San Pablo. The three big projects that happened in my time in Albany on San Pablo are located near Solano and near Portland. All of them front on both San Pablo and Kains or Adams. So this was providing increased access for all ages and abilities to the key development corridor that we've created.
I think the public, she wants to comment. Is that okay?
You're not on mic.
Oh, there's a person at the side who would like
you
to
have
talk.
a very short comment? Okay.
Obviously, one of the landlords did forward the information to their tenants, but there are so many apartments on Kains and many on Adams that if there's any way, when you're sending notices, to send them to the tenants, not just to the landlord, and say, please forward this to your tenants, I think that would help with awareness.
Just a comment about how public notice is sent out for meetings. Is it true that it's only sent to owners, not to residents?
We send to the address, and if there's a owner separate, we send it there, I believe, too. For multifamily, if it's listed with multiple units, we send it with unit 1, 2, 3. We're dependent on the post office to actually, deliver to the actual units, but we attempt to get to tenants.
I've seen those cards left with the circulars at the base of groups of mailboxes.
Okay, who has not spoken yet and would like to?
Chair, we do have one more hand raised online if you'd like to.
A person who hasn't spoken?
Someone who has spoken, I think, about this topic relating to landlords and tenants.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Elaine Stelton, please
Less
go
than
ahead.
1 minute, please.
Yeah, just wanted to let you know, my tenants did receive notice for whatever that's worth. So I found out from a different source about this, but my tenants did get notice at their physical addresses. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have any thoughts?
I'm completely in support of option 1 right now. Mainly, although I don't...
A little closer to the mic.
I think it would be a real process in order to get the law changed through the state, and I don't think that would be feasible for the short term. So, in my opinion, I think that it would be best to go with option 1 in that you implement more signage and make it better known that the street is now two-way for people exiting their driveways.
Okay, just for the, I think, just for the sake of the keep going, can I suggest that we break down option 1 and break option 2 into different consensus? Because otherwise you will go back and forth. For example, can we reach a consensus on that counterflow parking is okay?
I don't think we're quite there yet because I don't think we've heard from
Okay.
Michael, have you had a chance to speak on this?
Yeah, I was on the council at the time when
You make sure to speak into the mic.
this was approved. I think this is on. And I just want to point out that what we've done here is not what the council approved. The council approved counterflow parking and people having to make the Y turns, which I always thought was ridiculous. I thought it was dangerous, and in some sense...
Can I just ask you for a second? When you say what kind of parking did the council approve?
What the council approved was people pulling in. For example, let's say, picture Kains north of Solano, where the traffic is southbound. So the idea is that people would pull into the street, come down southbound, do a Y turn, and then park northbound in the other direction.
Okay, because the way we're using the term contraflow parking is for the opposite behaviors, for continuing to park.
Okay, you're right. My apologies.
Facing even when you're on the northbound
okay.
side of the street. So just wanted to clarify.
In any case, what the council approved was having cars park in the legal direction. So I'm just pointing that out because so technically we have not adopted the council's pilot yet because we haven't told people they have to turn and park in the other direction. So what happened here is basically the citizens who live on those streets just vetoed that idea and parked in the same old direction they ever did. And in the short term, the police shrugged their shoulders. So my concern is that if the council approved the version of this project, this pilot, with cars legally parked, that should be what gets tried. So, I suppose we just need to make sure that if we recommend the status quo, basically, that's not what the council approved. It's also illegal. And I think there's a very good chance that if we vote for what we're calling option one, police are going to say, okay, well, look, we have to start enforcing the law, and you're going to have to start turning your cars around. And then it becomes a whole different project, because I think, I've been down these streets many times, mostly north of Solano, having cars doing wide turns in front of you when you're on a bicycle is really dangerous, because you don't know, do I stop? Do I go behind them in one direction? Do I go behind them in the other direction? Do I go up on the sidewalk? So just be forewarned that my personal guess is that if we say go with option one, the police are going to step in and say, we have to start enforcing the law. I do agree that, I'm not sure who does risk management now at the city, but I think there is some real concern about liability if somebody does get hurt and the perception is, in a damages case with the jury, that the city just flaunted the law and someone was injured, because we're going to be liable for a big settlement. This happens on, the lack of sidewalks and viable sidewalks had created similar situations where we were liable for people's injuries because we had bad sidewalks. Can we put up the red arrow diagram again? Until this year, when I was indisposed, I've ridden my bike a lot. That situation has happened to me in the Berkeley Hills. And I'm afraid I have to respectfully disagree with Fareed, because if...
Can you make sure to stay close to the mic, please?
Yeah, if you are traveling in the same direction as the cars, what you do, and what in fact they train you to do, if you take motorcycle classes, you look at the wheels of the cars. And if you see the car's wheel turning out like this, that clues you in they're about to pull out. So if you and the cars are going in the same direction, you've got more time. One, because that wheel that you have to look at is further away. Two, when the car pulls out, it's at a relatively shallow angle, and if you can go around it, it's easier. But even if you can't and it hits you, you're getting sideswiped. And you get knocked to the ground, but that's a gentler kind of accident. And the driver is, granted, they may have to look in their mirror, and they may or may not see you unless they turn around to look, but you're right there, and you can yell at them, and if you yell at them, they can hear you because they're on that same side of the car. Now, in this situation, this happened to me once in a pickup truck. He just was parked in the wrong direction. He pulled right out in front of me.
You're off mic.
He pulled out right in front of my face. And fortunately, he got far enough around that I could scoot in and go down the side of his car to the inside. And I was not injured. But it was pretty scary. So in my personal experience, this is a very risky situation. Because one, if you're looking for the car to turn their wheels out, it's harder to see. Two, if you do get hit, if you do hit the car, you're hitting it directly. You're going right into the hood of the car. And the driver, because they're on the inside, it depends. Maybe they can see through the windshields of the other cars, but a lot of times they can't because the windows are tinted or there's glare or whatever. You have to get out pretty far before they can see whether or not you or a car are coming. So, I don't ride my bike down Kains. I ride my bike down Stanage, because Stanage is much less parked up, it has less traffic, and I think it's a much more calm and relaxed street to drive on. So that's my concern. So I think we're rolling the dice on number one. You know, my preference based on riding my bike on these streets, and I often go down, I go down Talbot if I want to go to Hal's office. I go down Cornell from either Portland or Washington. If I want to go to the post office, I will go down Stanage if I want to go down to a friend's house or to Souvenir Coffee. I never go down Kains. Kains makes me nervous. I'm still alive. I've been riding my bike, I don't know, at least 50 years. I can hardly remember not riding a bicycle. I trust my instincts. Kains just makes me nervous. I don't think it's a safe street to ride your bike on. I avoid it if I can. And in fact, excuse me, the only reason I've been on it recently is to check it out for safety. I much prefer Stanage, at least north of Solano. I don't ride south of Solano much. So I think either 2 or 3, have pluses and minuses, but I think they're a better way to go. I personally would prefer 3. It's kind of a toss-up, but because I think Stanage is already 2-way, it's a quieter street. It would be easier to put a bike lane there. The fact that it's 1 block further off of San Pablo, I'm like, okay, that's 150 feet. I mean, people ride their bikes several miles when they're commuting. I commuted, back and forth to campus for 11 years. A couple of other points. Cars, the analogy to diagonal parking on Solano, I think, is not really accurate anymore because most cars have backup cameras in the back, and you don't have to pull your car out of your parking lot very far to be able to look in the camera and see if there's cars coming. Where in this situation, there's no little camera in your right front headlamp that's going to tell you if there's traffic coming towards you. The other thing is rain. Look, we got to get real. These numbers that you collected were collected in the summertime. I commuted to campus every day, regardless of the weather conditions. I mean, UC Berkeley is very good about encouraging people to ride their bikes. I would sometimes just put my wet rain gear on over my pajamas and ride in because I knew I'd be dripping wet anyway by the time I got to work. Okay, I'll repeat that. When I commuted to UC Berkeley and it was really raining, I would just put on my rain gear and wrap up my dress clothes and put them in garbage bags and put them in my panniers because I knew I'd get wet no matter what. In those days when it was pouring rain like that, I did not see a lot of bike commuters out there. Most of those days I never saw anybody else out there but me. And there's also the issue of nighttime. I avoid riding at night like the plague. However, certain times of the year when it's dark at night after work, I would have to ride in the dark, but I always rode in the same street. It was mostly Milvia, which is much wider than Kains. It's 36 feet instead of 30, but it seems much wider when you're commuting on your bicycle. It's not nearly as parked up. And you have to memorize where all the potholes are because you can't see them. So the notion that we will have streets that are safe enough for kids to ride their bikes on in the rain, in the winter, at night, in the dark, I think is unreasonable. I think you will see a dramatic drop. You see a dramatic drop off on people commuting on bikes when it's raining or when it's dark. And that means people are still going to be in their cars. So that is something else I think we have to keep in mind. So to wrap it up, my weak preference is 3 over 2. I think 1 is very problematic. And I think it's beyond our control because ultimately I think this is a call for the police chief to make. You know what? That's just my opinion. The police chief might not agree with me.
I think we're all kind of speculating about what the police may or may not do.
I have an answer for your question. When you're driving your bike down a street and a car is turning in front of you, you stop. Just as if you were in a car. That's the answer. And if you're going too fast to do that, and you have to turn inside of a car, you're going too fast for that street.
Life is not like that, I'm sorry. What if the car is accelerating rapidly? If you stop, he's going to hit you if you don't get out of the
I guess you move over. But in the case where you said, what should you do when you're going down a street and a car is turning, should you go around it one way or the other? It's very simple. You stop.
That would have not saved my life in that situation. Sorry.
Okay, I think everybody has had a chance to speak except myself, so I have a few things to add. It seems to me we've heard a lot of support for option 1 and a lot of support for another option that wasn't on the list, which is just to end the pilot and go back to the way things were. We've heard very little support for options 2 or 3. I think just a small handful of people, including Michael, have spoken up in favor of one of those. I'm a little bit torn. I like option 1, and I think Fareed made a strong case for why it should be okay to continue with the parking the way it is. I don't think it's totally okay, and I especially think that it does lead to people seeing the streets as being one way for cars, and that has caused some of the driver conflict and road rage incidents that we've heard. So if there were a way to fix the parking challenge without losing these being high-quality bike boulevards, I think I would like it. And I think that what staff is proposing in option 2 may be an attempt to do just that, but I think it hasn't really been formulated in a convincing way yet, and I'm wondering if we can rethink it a little bit, where option 2 is not saying we're just going to make these streets into free-for-all through traffic streets that will inevitably pick up more through traveling cars. When we take out the bollards, what if we don't do that until we have the medians ready to go? So we spend some time, come up with a design for what the medians could look like. And then as we have the opportunity and the funds, we can take out some bollards and put in the medians at locations close to that. Then what we have is not so much a wholesale undoing of the bikeway. It's just changing the nature of the bikeway. It'll still have reduced car traffic. It'll still have two-way bike travel. And it'll still have through travel allowed for bikes and not for cars. It's just that the mechanism of blocking that through travel is a different mechanism that leads to different traffic flow. And it would lead to more, I don't think it would lead to everybody parking with the flow of traffic on every occasion. I mean, even on my street, people don't do that. People sometimes see a parking space on the other side and they just pull into it because why not? It looks perfectly safe to them. They don't care if it's against the law because people do things that are against the law all the time, and the police usually don't ticket it unless it's particularly dangerous or egregious violation. So I would think if we went with a option 2 that was well designed, I would hope the outcome would be that maybe 80% of drivers would park in the direction of traffic. And the few that wouldn't really be causing any problems. It would fix the problem of the visual appearance of the street. It would look like a two-way street. It would feel like a two-way street. There would be a more even division, 50-50 division of which direction cars were traveling. People would get into it by turning right onto the one block. They would travel one block. They would exit that block by turning right off of it. And that could be done in a northbound or southbound direction. It's just not a through movement. It's not a good alternative to San Pablo. If people tried to divert from San Pablo onto Kains, if they're going north on San Pablo and they thought, this is congested, I want to try the next street over, you take Kains, maybe they're lucky enough to arrive at a place where there's no median and they can get onto Kains going northbound. But at the end, maybe there would be a median there, and then they have to turn right, and they're going east on the next street. They're going away from San Pablo, and they say, why did I do this stupid thing? I'm never going to do this again. So I would hope that we would at least consider that interpretation of option 2. I don't really want to consider option 3. We've heard at least one person speak in support of it, but to me, option 3 sounds like we're saying essentially it's not that different from what a lot of the public commenters said who just didn't think that a bike facility along San Pablo was necessary. And I would disagree with that strongly. I think if we decide that Adams and Kains are not viable bike facilities for whatever reason, what we need to do is go back to our plans for San Pablo, which are not very far evolved yet, and say we want to do what Oakland is doing. We want a dedicated bus lane and a dedicated bike lane. I mean, that a lot of people were in favor of that, but we didn't win the day. And instead, the decision was, well, we can have bike access 1 block away. But if that's going to be downgraded to 2 blocks away, I don't think that's a fair conclusion of where our public process went. So I'm pretty strongly opposed to option 3, but I do want to hear other people's thoughts about option 2. I want to just say a couple other brief things first. One is that we haven't really turned these streets into bike boulevards. They're bikeways in the sense that you can ride in both directions. Make them bike boulevards. I watched a video about Portland that casually said, yeah, in Portland, we decided we wanted to have a bike boulevard. So we took this street, we put in some traffic diverters to prevent cars from going through, and we turned all the stop signs. And they just shrugged their shoulders and said, that's what you do to make a bike boulevard. We haven't done any of that. We put in the street blockage, but every intersection, bikes have to come to a complete stop and look for cross traffic a long distance away that's not stopping. We have some plans to improve a couple of the big streets through the ACTC project, and that's really important, and I'm glad it's going to happen, but it hasn't happened yet, which means we don't have a bike boulevard yet. We need to stay the course with the pilot at least until that's in place before we can say whether the bikeway is working or not. But we need to do it in other places too. At every little street that you cross, you shouldn't have to stop and crane your neck in both directions. That's not conducive to what a bike boulevard is supposed to feel like. So we need, I think we've heard some engineering suggestions for how the stop signs could be reversed in those locations. I know there are problems, but that's the kind of improvement that we need to be looking ahead to rather than saying we're going to cancel this because we don't see enough bikes on it yet. Regarding signage, almost everybody said we should have better signage. Very few people said, here's what the better signage should look like. So I would really appreciate anybody's ideas of what the signage could be. I think we heard a few, and they were good, and I hope we can follow up on them, including the postcards, not just signs, but also outreach. One that occurred to me is a dotted yellow line. I know you can't paint the dotted yellow line down the whole length of the street, because it makes it look like cars have to stay completely on one side of it or the other, and that's not always practical. But maybe just an occasional yellow dot, just to kind of lay the idea that that if you connected all those yellow dots in your mind, you'd be drawing a line down the middle of the street, making it two-way traffic. I don't know if that's feasible or not, but I hope we can come up with some more creative ideas instead of just saying, yeah, the signage was terrible and that's the problem. I wanted to ask Michael, I guess as the end of my comments, I'll ask you and you can follow up. You said the council approved this project with a specific designation that cars were to make three-point turns and park in the direction of traffic. I don't really recall that. What I recall was that we kind of remained purposely agnostic about parking direction and decided that people would figure it out. Do you have recollection
Well, it's
different from that?
not my recollection. It's easy enough to find out. We can just go back and look at the record.
So I would love to hear if people have thoughts about option 2 and the way I presented it, and also if people have creative ideas for signage improvements.
We also might need a little more time for our discussion.
Oh, to extend the meeting. Oh, yeah.
Move we extend to 10?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, are all hands raised? All hands were raised.
Can we, is it a good time to talk about option 2?
Sure.
I strongly support that idea. I think option 2, our staff did spend a lot of time on it, and we should talk about it. And personally, I think option 2 has a lot of good points. It tries really hard to facilitate all the residents to park legally, right? I think that's a big idea behind it. And then secondly, if I remember right, I was doing some diagrams this afternoon. It actually increased the route options for residents to come home. I think there are 4 compared to 3 to the to the current situation. And then it also kind of stop people from using it as alternative route as San Pablo, right? Because every other intersection you will put a median diverter, stop people from going, straight up or straight down, correct?
That can be included. It was.
Oh, it's not included?
It was recommended to address additions to traffic diversion if they arise. It wasn't assuming.
Okay, if that's the case, I would
there's
suggest,
other direction.
okay, sorry, so my misunderstanding, if I'm to support option 2, a median diverter has to be there, otherwise it will be a total alternative routes for San Pablo. And then if we have the median diverter, I think that will solve a lot of people's concern, including people emailing, saying that, if you, that it's kind of catering to vehicle than bikes.
Yeah, I think the difference is if option 2 is that you take out the bollards and then see what happens, then it could be years before those medians get in place. Just thinking about how long it took to get this pilot in place, that was about 10 years, is that right? I don't want to take out the bollards and wait 10 more years for medians. I think if we want to switch, we should have it be a swap out of one for the other. And perhaps medians every other block or something like that would suffice. We'd need to figure out the details.
Yeah, I mean, my only comment for either of them is that I think that if we're going to have a usable bike boulevard, we need either extensive bump outs to shorten the walking distance across the street and slow cars down at the intersection, or actual stop signs at every crossing. There is simply not enough visibility to proceed at any real pace along the bike along either side. During the day, at least, you can see headlights a lot better at night.
I didn't quite understand. Can you repeat?
Yeah, so like when you're going along the bike boulevard, I mean, several people mentioned this, like without an all-way stop or a stop for cross traffic, because there's parking on both sides of the cross street, often you're left craning your head out on your stopped bike, trying to see if there's someone, because people pick up a lot of speed in Portland and on Washington especially. So crossing, I use Kains occasionally, but my wife loves it, but I personally just don't. I don't like the constant interruption, and I don't feel quite as safe.
I think that's the same thing that I said about needing the the intersections to favor the bike boulevard rather than the
right.
other way around. Okay, thanks.
I just wanted to make clear that like even for option 1 or option 2, even with the median, like the median at Cedar was mentioned a couple of times. It feels like a death trap. Like, it's like, here's this inviting piece of bike infrastructure. You're going to get clocked by one of the cars going because there's no visibility to the left or the right. So you have to, like, really be careful going through that median. And it's not big enough for a cargo bike. I've nearly lost the tail of my bike having to do an emergency stop, and then someone had to swerve around me. Like, it's not, without cross-traffic stopping, those medians are not particularly effective for anything other than diverting cars. They're not really a safety feature for bicycles.
I'd like to second that. I commuted this summer through that intersection at Cedar and 9th, and the visibility was not sufficient to get out in the lane, let alone cross the whole intersection. And I didn't feel that the median was long enough for my normal length bicycle to pause in the middle. And I have that same feeling on Kains at Garfield. The street is narrow enough and the cars are parked up solidly often enough that I have to put my nose out before I can see what's going on.
So all of this applies equally to option 1 or 2, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Good.
So I also, if I may, I'm disappointed that we're looking at data that's from 6 months ago. I'm curious to know what's happened since then. And to get a one-on-one comparison, we should probably actually look at what's going on in April. Now, weather conditions could be different, but I'm interested in the pilot going on until we can get data in April.
I agree with that. I think that I would like the pilot to go on with better signage. If we do pavement arrows at the intersections where there's an inbound and outbound movement, that will highlight for people, oh, hey, cars are supposed to go both ways here. Among other things, it'll get cars onto the correct side of the street rather than coming down the center of the street as they're turning in. And there may be more, but I mean, that's just an example. But I think that pragmatically, to make option 2 palatable, needs design of those medians. It needs the visibility of those intersections to be fixed. The median on 9th at Cedar is very minimal. It's what we're able to squeeze in. The median at Dwight in California is at least 10 feet wide to accommodate cargo bikes. And it took out a lot of parking, and it cost a lot. So it needs design, it needs vetting with the public to let them know that the parking on Washington and on Portland, a lot of it's going to have to go away to accommodate those medians, to be wide enough to be a refuge, not just a barrier to left turns. If all you want is a barrier to left turns, that's easy. But it's not going to provide a refuge for bikes crossing the intersection. I would rather see the stop signs turned or turned into four-way stops at those as a shorter-term improvement. Turning them into two-way
I don't
stop.
think the medians were intended as refuges, were they?
I don't think, as
option
proposed here, we don't have a lot of space. It takes a lot of space to turn it into a refuge, so I'm not confident. If we want that, we may not achieve it. So we need to evaluate what form of median is feasible and really do some layout drawings that get vetted with everybody. And there may have been more of that, already done, but I think that converting to two-way stops favors the bike boulevard. But I'd also be really nervous about doing that until we do something to break up the flow of traffic. Because if you turn Kains and Adams into a nonstop run for bikes, and oh, by the way, the cars that piggyback onto that, that's not desirable. That's not what we're trying to achieve. So I think we have to be incremental. And so I would say keep going with the pilot, option one, enhance the signage. Let's look into stop signs and barriers. What form exactly do the barriers take? Is it extending the curb, moving the stop sign out so you got better line of sight up and down the cross street before you cross. Although, if we go to a four-way stop, that shouldn't be an issue. So all of that, I think, staff working with, consultant could give us some pretty good guidance on that. And we'd need cost estimates and a sense of how long before we even could move in that direction. But in the meantime, option one seems like the best thing.
Option 1 plus.
Option one plus, absolutely. We need to upgrade the signage, the communication. I still think that as much as the council's position, as I understand it, was geared towards let's follow the letter of the law to minimize our liability, I think following the letter of the law when it's debatable whether that is actually the safer option doesn't feel so strong to me as, doing the safest thing liability-wise. But again, I also think that even if we switch this to a two-way street, we're going to see people parking willy-nilly. It's going to make the confusion today even worse.
Can I suggest something? I think if the consensus is to promote like option one, I don't think we should, as a council or as a commission, to put in any wording supporting counterflow parking, because that's illegal anyway. We can leave it, on the table, unspoken, not referred to, but we can put a supportive wording saying, yeah, that's actually safer. We're not in a position to do that.
Right, I do agree that not saying that we're absolutely blessing this. I think there is recognition that there's arguments to be made both ways for safety, for legality, for all of that. And that does not have to be part of what we're pushing for right now. We want to see how will people behave, and what can we do to improve the behavior we're seeing out there, recognizing it is two-way flow. So that makes sense.
Okay. Oh, I just want to add one point. And back in 2017, people were complaining about speeding, and then there's data showing that maximum speed goes to 41, 42 miles per hour. But it seems like among all the feedback we got from the community, nobody mentioned speeding anymore. Maybe that's a good sign. It says something about two-way or adding the bike help reduce speeding. Just a personal observation. Not sure that's the science.
I'd like to get to the point of a motion. I don't think we're going to have a unanimous one, but
I'm ready to start one.
Does anybody feel they want to add something before we get a motion?
I move that we recommend to council that the pilot continue through April through May to 2024 in order to allow us time to work with staff to come up with enhanced signage and marking, to consider possible alternatives, and to look at data closer to the time of the original data point.
Second that motion.
Do you want to mention the legislation angle?
No.
Okay. Well, we have a motion and a second. A roll call.
Commissioner Barnes?
No.
Commissioner Javindel?
Aye.
Commissioner McCroskey?
Yes.
Commissioner Peng?
Yes.
Commissioner Vihil McClanahan?
Yes.
Commissioner Von Neidingen?
Aye.
Chair Chomsky?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay. Any further discussion on this item? Staff, do you need anything more from us? Okay. So I don't think we have time for both 5-2 and 5-3. I'm hoping we could get through one of them. Do you think that's feasible?
maybe we should continue our long deferred safety to another meeting and
think
get
that
an
was-
update on the street tree
I
management
think
plan
the
tonight.
safety one will take longer.
It might take longer. There's a fair bit of information, and
Okay. I actually have a question about that. When we continue that and you post the agenda materials for it, are they the same every time, or are they accumulating more data as time goes on?
they've been the same.
Okay.
Okay, I will give a brief update then on the street tree management plan. Let's see. There we go. Okay. So the street tree management plan, or STMP, is something that's been in the works for some time, originally as a priority planning initiative in the CAP that was passed in 2019, as well as the city's general plan. So it's something that's kind of been in the air for several years now, but we've really started working on it in earnest in the last year. And overall, the goal of this plan is to modernize our street tree policies and really focus on the community's priorities, goals, and values when it comes to street trees. Like I said, the last year has been fairly busy. In November of 2022, City Council passed a resolution executing a contract with Arbor Pro for a street tree inventory. And then staff presented, the inventory was completed in April of this year. And then in March, staff presented an RFP for consulting services for the plan itself. And just in September, the council approved a contract with Hort Science for that planning service. So I'll talk a little bit about phase one, which is sort of this past year. That was the street tree inventory, which, like I said, was completed by Arbor Pro last spring. This contract was taken to council in November of 2022, and then the data was collected between December and April. And this inventory is really important for the development of the plan and the kind of goals and policies that go into it. And the kind of main outcome of this inventory is the community viewer, which actually shows all existing street trees in the city as well as vacant planting sites. And so this is going to be used to help us maintain all of the trees and kind of identify and prioritize the different places that we can expand the tree canopy. It gives a lot of information about each tree, including the species, the growth space, the diameter. You can see some stats about the trees here. I won't read those all out. There's quite a few. And this is just an example of what this community viewer looks like to give you a sense of the information we have. This is one of the trees just outside of the building here, and you can see all the information there about it, as well as the location and a photo of the tree itself. And this is just one of the kind of main things that we looked at, which is diameter at breast height. It gives you a sense of the size of the tree and the percentages of each kind of size group. So as you can see, the majority of the city's trees are relatively small. About half of them are under 6 inches of diameter at breast height. So it gives you a sense of sort of the majority of the trees that we have out here, and they're all in fairly small tree wells, generally speaking. Skipping right through there. And then there's phase two, which is the actual planning process itself, the creation of the street tree management plan. And so that's the phase we're in now that we've finished the inventory. So like I said, in March, staff created the RFP to find a consultant. And then in September, the council approved Hort Science / Bartlett Consulting to work on the plan. And this is just kind of an overview of the approach that Hort Science will be taking and how we'll be working with them. I won't go through all of this in detail, but there's a lot of focus on using the data from the inventory, of course, as well as a lot of community input. There will be a lot of community engagement as a part of this. We're planning to do all kinds of outreach and events and surveys. And then there will also be a review of the city's current policies and sort of which of those make sense, how we might want to change them, what the opportunities are. And then it'll end in the creation of the plan document itself, which will have all kinds of policies that we plan on implementing, procedures, KPIs or performance indicators, public education, kind of all the things that help us get to those goals that we set throughout the planning process. So that's what's coming up. Just on October 16th, so about a week ago, the council held a study session to just sort of talk about this in more detail and provide the input that they had before we really get started on the planning process. And then we're also, coming in the next month or so, going to be starting to meet with Hort Science and working on the first steps of the plan. And then probably in December, although it hasn't been scheduled just yet, there will be a discussion with the Parks, Rec, and Open Space Commission about the kind of beginnings of the planning stage as well. So that is an update on how things have been going. Just wanted to kind of provide that to you as we start this next phase and give you an opportunity for any questions or comments.
Thank you. Questions from the commission?
George, just briefly, we just held a lighting demo for street lighting. We're also repairing our sidewalks, so sidewalks, lighting, and trees all interact with each other. And there are some examples of what not to do, for example, liquid amber trees. So talk to me a little bit about how this all fits together.
Go for it, Justin.
It does. So it is helpful to have the lighting survey and the recommendations there. The lighting study is identifying places where there is conflict with existing tree canopy and lightings for quicker issues to address. The street tree management plan will address where planting of new trees is appropriate and will help, I think, better balance between lighting considerations and tree canopy. So looking at these at the same time, they'll inform each other. The other component of this is we are wrapping up our sidewalk maintenance, and we'll be looking to potentially go to voters to reauthorize funding for the sidewalk maintenance, and are evaluating whether it makes sense, because there is overlap between some of these things, to figure out if those should be combined together in an ask, or how we should be ramping up street tree maintenance to better align with sidewalk maintenance as well.
Other questions? Do we have any public comment about this online?
We do have a few attendees, but I don't see any hands raised.
Okay, well, let's begin our discussion, and if people want to raise their hands, we can break for public comment. Anybody want to start the discussion? Anybody have any thoughts?
I just want to say thank you for the presentation. Good information in here. Surprising how many skinny trees we have.
Any other comments? Well, thank you. That's good to know what's going on. So I guess we move on to item 6, announcements.
I have one main announcement, update from AC Transit's Realign team. Coming up On November 1st at 5 p.m., the AC Transit Board of Directors will receive a presentation introducing 3 draft service plan scenarios that highlight separate alternatives for the bus routes and schedules that make up the AC Transit network. So I believe their packet goes out tomorrow. This will be our first look at their planning process, getting to actual scenarios and what that looks like. So that will be important to take a look at. We've been coordinating with them. They couldn't present to this group before they go to their board, so it didn't align with our schedule. But they will be going to City Council at the next City Council meeting to present. So that gives our community the most time to hear the presentation and weigh in on this phase and provide feedback. So they're going to be looking for comments on these preliminary service scenarios between that November 1 meeting through December 13th. So there will be a little over a month window to review the information and provide feedback. So they're encouraging folks to help share information with your networks to get the word out, to take a look at that. Aside from our City Council meeting November 6th and the board meeting November 1st, the other main meeting that they are advertising for participation will be a virtual workshop on December 7th on Zoom, 6 to 7:30 p.m. And the information
meeting.
What's that?
Which conflicts with our next meeting.
Yes. So attend the council meeting or the board meeting to get your presentation. The information should also go live on their website tomorrow. That's the update on that project.
Announcements from committee members. Reed?
Since we've worked on daylighting of intersections in the past, I thought it'd be worth mentioning Assembly Bill 413 was approved and goes into effect in January. I'll double check, 2024, 2025, would prohibit parking within 20 feet of a crosswalk. So this is statewide daylighting of intersections has been signed into law.
So that's like what we've been doing case by case with red curbs, but now it's going to apply even if the curb isn't painted red.
Correct.
Does it apply if the crosswalk isn't painted?
I think so. I'm going to have to double check that. The quick summary that just popped up online says a marked crosswalk, but I'm pretty sure it said marked or unmarked.
Thank you.
Yeah, 413, Assembly Bill 413.
I believe the language of marked or unmarked remains. It is something that we'll need to discuss because it does allow local jurisdictions to adjust from that with findings, I think, and with marking. And since we have been marking different amounts, we'll have to revisit what our approach should be.
But it at least covers everything we've done. So we're, if anything, conservatively less.
Other announcements? Okay, future agenda items. Obviously, the review of vehicle injury collision data, our old favorite.
Expect to have the street lighting presentation back this next meeting. And we've also been asked, all the advisory bodies have been asked to prepare a status update report for council. So we'll bring a draft of that to the commission next month.
That's where we are telling the council what we've been up to, basically, right?
That's correct.
Okay. Any other thoughts about future agenda items? Okay, our next meeting will be December 7th at 7 p.m. We don't have a regular meeting in November and December because those get into the holiday periods when people aren't available. So our single meeting for the remainder of this year is on December 7th. Thank you. This meeting is adjourned.